Everyone has stories to tell about their own life in that transition from childhood to full adulthood. I'll let you know when I get there. What parent hasn't experienced, or grandparent or babysitter hasn't experienced being in a store and your kid decides to play hide and go seek in one of those clothing rounders, right? The definition of a split second is how long it takes me to panic when that happens. This is the story of Jesus' second visit to the temple as far as we know. We don't know if he went those other times with his family. The first one comes earlier in Luke, 8 days after his birth. There's something else to say about that, but I'll be here too long if we get into that. And Anna and Simeon witness to the presentation of the 8-day-old Jesus. How we come to wisdom and let the light shine as we grow in faith and wisdom is what this story is about. This is the only story in the proper New Testament canon, but it's not the only story that the traditions give us for a young Jesus. There are some later traditions, which is in a very apocryphal book, in fact, a fanciful book altogether, called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. That's different than the Gospel of Thomas, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. And there is some wild stuff in there, some stuff that tells stories about Jesus that are, well, it's not hard to see why it didn't make it in the Bible, let me tell you. So not biblical, but fun. There's 5-year-old Jesus who makes birds out of mud. That part I totally believe. But when this kid claps his hands, the birds fly away. So that's fun. I don't know why. Later, when he's older, he helps his father in the carpenter shop. Some of you are going to love this. By stretching a board that got cut too short. Apparently, Joseph never heard measure twice, cut once. But Jesus saved the board. Then there's a less salubrious story about Jesus causing a boy who jostles him in the marketplace to die, after which he strikes blind the people who complain about it. You just know that's fiction. So why would anybody pass that story around? And there's one about how he raises a child who fell off a roof from death, but it turns out he raised the child so that the child would testify that Jesus didn't push him off the roof. That's apropos of nothing in this sermon, but it's just too good not to share. But the biblical story, recorded by Luke, and generation after generation after generation for hundreds and hundreds of years, people have affirmed this as canonical. Canonical simply means it belongs in the Bible. All the stuff that would like to be in the Bible, there's a lot of stuff that never made it in. We get something entirely different in this story. Have a look up there. We get a 12-year-old who is, let's just say, a 12-year-old. You know, a 12-year-old. And we get a 12-year-old with a kind of wisdom that lets the light of God's love and grace shine through. The kind of wisdom that lets the love and grace of God shine through. Because that's the kind of wisdom we want. The kind that lets the light and love of God shine into our own lives and through us to others. Now, in Jewish tradition, Jesus is now an accountable adult. He's 12. In the religious community, he is now embraced among the adults. Now, he's still learning and he's still growing, but he's in those transitional years where he's no longer permitted to be just a child. He is expected to begin to acquire some of the responsibilities of an adult. And as a very human, we have this side of Jesus in this story that prompts a kind of understanding chuckle about teenagers. And we also get a story about a Jesus who startles us and moves us closer to the light of grace and wisdom. It's a story about Jesus's relationship to God. It's a story about Jesus' relationship to his family. It's a story about Jesus' relationship with his religion. And in it, we see the light of God's wisdom shining through him. And I hope we hear an invitation to walk in that light and grow in that light ourselves. As you probably know, this is not the last time Jesus is going to be a little provocative. He can employ the literary device we call snark on more than one occasion. But he also has youthful wisdom, even beginning now. And in it, we hear an invitation into the light of God that can shine into our broken places, in the darker corners of our lives, and then shine out from us to a broken world. Wisdom is a hard thing to pin down. Wisdom is not intelligence. Wisdom is not shrewdness. Wisdom is not about winning or getting ahead, but neither is it about giving up, giving in, or giving way. Wisdom isn't intelligence. Wisdom is knowing where to find the path to the light. Wisdom is knowing yourself. Wisdom is making space for others. Author Tex Sample, who has a great Texas accent when he talks about this, and I'm not going to imitate it, he explains the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence is having a lot of good information. Wisdom is knowing when to use it. Common sense intelligent is knowing a good, pithy saying that has a lot of truth in a short, sharp, memorable way. Wisdom is knowing which pithy statement to use in which situation. In this story, we are introduced to a Jesus who is starting to let his wisdom shine. He knows the way to the light. He knows where to find it in his Father's house, where he is already engaged in spiritual community beyond his family, the heart of God, drawing us close to God and to one another. Many years ago, I was on radio a couple of times, just a few times. Some of you may know Dennis Prager, but you may not know that he didn't used to be quite so out there. And he had a really great show on some AM radio. It was on Sunday nights at 10 o'clock, which meant nobody heard it. It was called Religion on the Line. Religion on the Line. It was a call-in show, and Dennis Prager, who is Jewish and a very well-educated Jew about religious matters, would have a Roman Catholic priest, a Jewish rabbi, maybe a Catholic theologian or instead of a priest, and always a Protestant as well. Sometimes he also had a Buddhist or a Muslim, and several times I was the Protestant. A couple of those times, I was younger, a lot younger. I went head-to-head with Dennis Prager, arguing some point of theology, and I always lost. Always. Not because he was right, but because he could argue better. And that's fine. He could argue better. That would force me to think harder. But it seemed like I could never get the hang of it, and something didn't feel right about it. And not too much after that, maybe just a year or two, I was at some conference and was in a small group with a very famous, well-known, brilliant theologian. And I asked her about this situation. I said, every time I'm on this radio show, I lose the argument because this guy is a better arguer and he's smarter than I am. But I just know in my gut that something's wrong with his argument. And she said this: when you know intuitively something's wrong, ask yourself, if his argument is right, who benefits? If his argument is right, who benefits? That's wisdom. And she went on, she said, if it's oppressors benefiting, if people already clawing for power, the selfish, the greedy, the arrogant, then you may not have the better argument, but your intuition is right. There is something wrong with his argument. That's wisdom. Just because you don't like someone's argument, that's not wisdom. But trusting your gut and having a plumb line that said, if he's right, who benefits? That's a good barometer for spiritual wisdom. Not an accumulation of information or the ability to wield your argument better than someone else, although there's some to be said for that, but knowing a true plumb line for spiritual goodness. Who benefits? Doesn't that just shine with Jesus-like wisdom? Doesn't that just sound like compassionate change-maker Jesus? Hint number 1. The light of God's wisdom always shines to free the oppressed, lift up the crushed, and heal the wounded. The light of God's wisdom always shines to free the oppressed, lift up the crushed, and heal the wounded, not make the rich richer or the powerful more powerful. A minute ago, I told you to pay attention to the reading from Genesis, a reading no doubt familiar to you, even if you've never opened a Bible. And I pulled out the verses, not even all of them, where God says, let. Let. When we embrace the let of God, we begin to take some spiritual risks. To let something happen is very different than making something happen. And in the spiritual life, we very often need to be paying attention to letting God work in us instead of making ourselves work for God. That doesn't come out right. Well, you know what I mean. To let God be at work in us is to relinquish the control we imagine we have, trusting that the light will be revealed to us, that it will shine on us, for us, and through us. One of my favorite songwriters from way back is Leonard Cohen, but it was quite a few years before I heard the song that had one of his most famous lyrics. It's now like t-shirt material. You see people with t-shirts with this lyric on it, or a part of it. And it says, "Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Hint number 2. The light of God's wisdom shines for you, especially in your broken places. What is the place in your life most in need of the light of God's grace and love and wisdom right now? Where do you think we most need the light of God's love and grace and wisdom? In our culture, in our society, in our world. Where are the cracks in your life where God might shine through? Those are the parts we want to, plaster over so that no one can see them, but they're very often the places where God shines through. Where is the light coming through? Can you let the light shine through you, through your imperfect self? Hint number 3. God's light both reveals and renews through you, broken as you may well be. In the book of Ephesians, the writer says, "Everything exposed by the light becomes visible." Such a spirit of openness happens when we engage in spiritual community. When our spiritual practice is not simply private, but it happens in community. Our journey happens in community. This is why recovery programs put such an emphasis on community, because if you're going to find a power great enough to help you recover from an addiction, it's not going to be you. It's going to be a higher power. And you find that by being in community. That's why Jesus' ministry starts when he's 12 in the temple with others, in a community of people talking and thinking and arguing about the Word of God. In community, the light shines for us, and the light shines through us. Our light shines. We listen, we speak, we laugh, we cry, we share words of truth, we share words of grace, we listen, we love, and we live generously. May the light shine for you, shine on you, and shine through you. I can see it in you. Can you?